My undergraduate degree is actually in microbiology. I worked in public health before I went to law school, and after law school, I was in the district attorney's office for Alameda County for 10 years before coming over to San Mateo County for 5 years. 2020 was an incredibly long year. We saw plots to kidnap governors. We saw angry mobs outside the homes of mayors. I spoke to mayors across the country who were dealing with angry violence. And I look around at the news today, and I know that today is a day that we will not soon forget. We will remember today for a very long time. Today is the kind of day that reminds us that there are two Americas. There's a white America and a black America. There's a Democratic America and a Republican America. There's a rich America and a poor America. And Diana invited me to have a conversation about our criminal justice system. Do we have two justice systems? It's hard to say no to that. It's really hard to say no to that when you look at the history of our country. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to go through a PowerPoint. If we have questions, throw them out at me. If you want to save your questions till the end, we can do that too. So what does it mean that Black Lives Matter? What does it mean?
Joe, you're not quite sharing your screen yet.
Uh-oh. What do you see? Let me see. What do you see now?
I'm just seeing our guests. So let me see if I gave you the multiple person, one person.
Let's try again.
Yeah, I've given you permission for sure.
Oh. How about now?
There it is.
Okay, let's go back one. Okay. So, can everyone see that now?
Everyone's muted. Yes, we can see it.
Good.
Yes. Yeah, we can see it. We can, yes.
So what does it mean that Black Lives Matter? Do Black Lives Matter? It doesn't seem like it when you look around at the country and you look around at recent history, you look around at our criminal justice system, whether it's as far back as slavery and abolition, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, civil rights, voting rights. It feels like the criminal justice system in many ways can be the new Jim Crow, and we see that it plays itself out that way in many ways in our communities. But what you need to understand about the criminal justice system is that we don't have one criminal justice system. We have many criminal justice systems across the country. In California, we have 58 counties. We have 58 different elected district attorneys, and each of them is entrusted with enforcing the laws and policing the police of those counties. And it's very important for us as voters to understand that we elect our leaders who enforce the laws for us. Because when we see issues like Breonna Taylor or Chinadu Okobi, Michael Brown, George Floyd, those issues come up, and our leaders who we elected are the ones who end up resolving those issues.
It's hard for me to imagine he gets there. I do not get the sense.
What does it mean to defund the police in this new world that we live in? It means different things to different people. I think for many, it depends on what your view of the police is and where you want to spend your money and what your experience has been in the criminal justice system. How do the police look to you? Do the police look like the picture on the left, that Norman Rockwell photo? A police officer is the person who is there to help me, or do the police look like the person on the right who you're afraid of? who you're nervous, who you don't want to call. It's really important in this society for us to value the police. I think the way that we treat the profession of police officer will determine the next generation of police officers. And I'm here to tell you that I've worked with many police officers. I know some of the best people who you would ever want to see wearing a uniform. And I've seen some who don't belong in the profession, who need to be held accountable, who need that sense of transparency. And we as elected officials need to hold them accountable for their actions. I'm reminded of a great quote from To Kill a Mockingbird. You never really understand a person until you consider things from their point of view, until you climb into their skin and walk around in it. I'm really thankful that we have lived experience with us tonight, people who can speak to how the criminal justice system treated them in Paul and many others. And as a defense attorney now, I have lots of clients and I talk to them about their lives and I try to climb into their skin and understand it. And of course, I will never understand what it is like to be them, but I listen to their stories and I understand where they come from and how they feel treated by our criminal justice system. This photo gives me hope right here, but if you look to the left and the African-American police officer, what about him when he's not wearing that uniform? Is he afraid to walk down the street? Is he afraid when the police pull him over when he's not wearing his uniform? Of course he is. And I'm sure he's afraid for his son or his daughter and their interactions with the police. And of course, they have to have that conversation. So the criminal justice system, I told you, there isn't just one. We have many criminal justice systems across this country and across this state. And we have seen dramatic changes in the criminal justice system in my lifetime. I was born in the 70s. And during the 70s, there was a belief that it was easy to get elected if you just promised harsher sentences. Longer sentences was the way to go. And there was also a belief that there was an unfairness. The uniform sentencing code was passed in part to eliminate the disparities between black and white defendants. They thought if we just provide specific numbers to judges and say this is what you have to sentence people to, then it'll be a fair system and everyone will get the same sentence whether you're white or black. Of course, we saw that did not happen. We saw our jails and our prisons filled with a lot more people of color and a disproportionate number. And how you answer this question really determines how you feel about our criminal justice system. It determines what kind of district attorney you're going to elect to your local district attorney's office. Do you believe that harsher sentences make us safer? Is it important to you that people spend more time in prison? Will we be safe when they get out? Do we not want them to get out? And depending on how you answer that last question really determines how you answer this one too. Do we need justice reform? And if we do, why? This is what our prison population in California has done since the 1930s. You see that it was in the 70s when they passed the sentencing laws and the enhancements where we saw an explosion in our prison population. So over the next few decades, the 80s, the 90s, and the 2000s, it wasn't that we saw a huge explosion in an increase in crime. It was that we were locking more and more people up for a longer and longer period of time. And you don't see it peak until 2010. And that's for a very specific reason. It wasn't that crime went down. It wasn't that we elected all new district attorneys. This table shows you how safe San Mateo County is. This is the most recent crime data that I could pull off the internet last night for this presentation. San Mateo has always been a very safe county. We're very fortunate in that way. You see that violent crime rates per 1,000 people is down at 2.1, which is very good. It's among the best in the state. You have to imagine there's 58 counties on this list, and we're towards the top. That's a good thing. But as I was saying, Assembly Bill 109 realignment passed in 2011 and went into place. And what it did was it said that if you commit a non-serious, non-violent, non-sex offense, we're no longer going to house those inmates in state prisons. You're going to have to house them in your local jail. Obviously, that's putting the cost and the expense of housing these folks onto the counties, and the counties, the thought was that the counties and the local district attorneys would think twice about who they choose to lock up in prison for long periods of time when it's actually their money that's at stake. What we saw from that was 41% reduction in new prison admissions, a huge reduction in the prison population by 28,000 plus, and the parole population dropped in half. Then we saw Proposition 47 in 2012. Again, we were seeing more reform with the goal to reduce the prison population that at its peak was over 180,000 people in California. It was so large that we were housing people in other states. Our prisons were entirely overcrowded. We had filled every single room of the prisons. And it got to the point where it wasn't safe. And so our courts said, you have to reduce your prison population. There were some people who just wanted to build more prisons. But Prop 47 came along, and Prop 47 said nonviolent drug and property offenses are no longer going to be felonies. They're going to be misdemeanors. Misdemeanors can still send someone to jail for up to a year. But it meant that fewer people were going to be sent to prison for nonviolent offenses. And this resulted in a further reduction in our prison population. Proposition 47 has been analyzed quite a bit. There was a study in 2018 by the Public Policy Institute for California that found evidence that Prop 47 has contributed towards an uptick in perhaps some lower level property crimes, larceny, and auto break-ins. But that same study said that there was a decline in recidivism and that there was no evidence of an increase in violent crime. Recently, police departments have attributed the rise in organized property crime to Prop 47. Prop 57 came along in 2016. There were quite a few criminal justice reform propositions on the ballot in 2016, and one of them was Prop 57. Prop 57 went after the longest prison sentences that we see. It said that nonviolent prisoners, one of the things Prop 57 did was it said nonviolent prisoners are eligible for parole after serving the sentence on their primary offense. So your primary offense could have a 5 or 10 year sentence, and you become eligible for parole after finishing that part of your sentence. And even if you had an enhancement that was 5 more years or 10 more years, you become eligible after serving the primary offense. So many people were becoming eligible for parole at a much earlier date, with the legislators' goal being to get more people out of the prison and onto parole. Another thing that Proposition 57 did was it changed elder parole. So this new elder parole allows anyone who is over the age of 60 and who has served more than 25 years of their sentence to be eligible for parole. What we have seen in our prison population is that it's getting older and older, just like our population is. We have inmates in their 70s and their 80s and their 90s, and people who are serving these sentences of 50 and 100 years. It's essentially a death sentence, and they will die in prison. But Prop 57 said, no, we will make them eligible for parole if they have served at least 25 years of their sentence and they are over the age of 60. We also saw youthful parole, which meant that anybody who committed their offense when they were between 18 and 25 and they have served at least 25 years of their sentence. So these are people in their 40s and 50s and 60s who have served 25 years of their sentence. They are now eligible for parole. And we also saw additional credits for programming. This has led to a significant reduction in the prison population. A lot of people over the age of 60 out on parole, a lot of people who had their offenses when they were 18, 19, 20, becoming eligible for parole in their 50s. And it has led to a dramatic decrease in our prison population. Also on the ballot in 2016 were Props 62 and 66. 62 would have abolished the death penalty. 66 streamlined it somewhat, overcame the judicial hurdles. Statewide, 62 did not pass, 66 did pass, but by very thin margins, 51, 52%. In San Mateo County, voters actually voted to abolish the death penalty by a 2/3 margin. And when Governor Newsom was elected, he placed an administrative hold on the death penalty, which rendered the entire issue moot for now, or at least until we have a new governor or a new proposition. We also saw Proposition 64 on the ballot in that same year, 2016. Marijuana was legalized for all purposes, sale and cultivation, which led to a lot fewer contacts between police and young people. And legalization meant a lot fewer prosecutions for marijuana and a lot fewer incarcerations, saving tens of millions of dollars in the investigation and prosecution of those cases, and also increasing tax revenue in the hundreds of millions and billions of dollars. What we're seeing today is that there are new district attorneys who are running on a more liberal agenda of eliminating the death penalty, reforming our bail system, not prosecuting kids as adults, looking at our jail population. Even here in San Mateo County, half of our jail population are people with mental health issues, and half of our jail population are people who are struggling with addiction. And let's talk about addiction for just a minute. We are in the throes of the opioid addiction, and it is hard for me not to look back and compare and contrast it to the crack epidemic that we faced in the 80s and 90s. When we were in the throes of the crack epidemic, we declared war on drugs, and our streets became war zones. Now, facing this opioid addiction, most opioid users happen to be white. We're much more amenable to treatment. We're not trying to lock up every opioid user. We're not trying to lock up every opioid dealer. It's a very different approach. And frankly, I like this approach because I come from a mental health background, and I think addiction should be addressed through treatment. But you can't help but look at how the crack epidemic was treated very differently, and how much of that has to do with what the users look like. I'll let you answer that for yourselves. I think we have an opportunity to build a better system of restitution for victims. If we are not incarcerating people for as long, then they can work harder to pay back their victims. We see victims who are left with huge bills for restitution, whether it's for their injuries or their damaged property or their stolen property, and we lock people up. And when we lock them up, they don't have the same opportunity to pay restitution to their victims. We need transparent and accountable policing. This is a big part of what needs to happen right now. We see those two Americas. We need to have accountability that allows people to trust their police officers. We need to inspire the next generation of police officers to step up and serve their communities. A generation of police officers that will not only reflect the diversity of the community, but reflect our values. And we need to eliminate the enhancements that really increase that systemic incarceration that we see. Whether you believe these are the right reforms or not has a lot to do with how you answer that initial question. Does locking people up for a much longer period of time make us safer or not? And I would take you back to the 1970s when murderers were literally being sentenced to 7 years. And now Now murderers get often 50 years or 100 years to life. So I'm more than happy to take any questions that anyone has at this point. So let's make this more of a dialogue and a conversation.
So thank you so much, Joe. Would you like to unshare so that we can see people?
Yes.
And there may be some people who might like to have your slides. If you wouldn't mind sharing them with me, that would be great too.
Yes.
But just to let people know, we did record Joe's presentation, and we will be recording the questions as well. So if you have questions, please raise your hand. And I see we have a couple of raised hands. And if you're not able to use the raise hand function, go ahead and leave me a message in chat. So our first person is Johanna Rasmussen.
Thank you so much. I was recently appointed to the same commission that Paul serves on and invited Paul to join us tonight. So I'm very happy that he's here with us. I come from a unique perspective because I'm the mother of a Black son, the wife of a police officer, and the mother of an adult daughter who was sentenced to the California Youth Authority when she was 15 years old. So my question tonight for Joe has to do with sentencing enhancements. I was called to serve on a jury last summer in a case that happened in your city in San Mateo. It was a high-profile gang murder, 2 defendants under the age of 25. It was a 6 weeks trial. It was very intense. I was shocked to find out that the actual enhancements for the crimes that they were being charged with carried a longer term, a sentence, than the actual murder charge itself. So I would hope, my question to you is, can you commit to place a moratorium on these sentencing enhancements for our young people under the age of 25, so we can work towards restorative justice and move away from warehousing and deeming our young people as irredeemable? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joanna.
Maybe you could answer, go ahead and answer her question, but I just wanted to make clear that Joe is here to give us advice on how we might be organizing, and so it's not a matter of him making commitments. So I just wanted to be clear about that part. Thanks.
So I gave you 2 examples of how this is being done right now. One is in our state legislature. They're reforming laws. They're passing laws. So one way to do this would be to lobby the state legislature to take away the enhancements that maybe really tack on to those sentences beyond a person's lifetime. In part, Proposition 57 has done that, because Proposition 57 in creating elder parole and youthful parole has made everyone eligible, unless it's an LWOP case, unless it's life without the possibility of parole. You will be eligible for parole after 25 years under either youthful parole or elder parole. Now, I think there may be an exception to that under the 3 strikes law. But the 3 strikes law is one of those enhancements that I think some people want to see reformed. The 3 strikes law is one of those things that really ties the hands of some prosecutors. The other way to do it is to elect district attorneys who are going to adopt those policies within their offices themselves. And like I said, we have 58 DAs in California. We have 58 different criminal justice systems.
Thank you. Our next question is from Leigh Larios and then Bill Newell.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation, Joe. I really liked that last picture in your slide. I think, you know, one of the more important roles of a DA is to lead by example, just like any elected official. And I really appreciated that last photo, and I just wanted to make note of it. But I wanted to ask, what is the best way to, you know, at least in our county, to implement a no cash bail system, given that it failed statewide?
So there's a more important question, I think, and it's not just a no cash bail. It's very specific to what is the bail system, because the Proposition 25, no, not 25. It was 21. What was it? I forget. The bail proposition on this last. Oh, thank you, Susie.
It was.
Thank you, Susie.
That was. Yeah.
So eliminating cash bail in some instances would mean more people are actually locked up. It would mean that judges are just making a determination of whether you're safe to go out and to be released or not, to be released on your own recognizance. And one of the fears that the ACLU and many other defense attorney organizations had was that if that particular reform was passed, more people would end up behind bars without even the option of posting bail. So I do think part of what we need to see in bail reform is an evaluation of whether someone is likely to come back to court, if they're a danger to the public. And we've seen the Supreme Court of California try to reform it themselves. We've seen some court cases. There was a Humphrey decision by the Supreme Court, which is a case from San Francisco that was appealed, that said you have to take into consideration the person's means to post bail. That's a step in the right direction. The federal system actually has a great system, which is you promise to return to court, you sign your name on a piece of paper, and there is no cash bail unless you fail to come back to court. That's a better system. I do think that we're going to end up with a hybrid where the danger to the public will be considered. There are situations, especially in domestic violence cases and really dangerous sex predators, where you don't want to release that person, or you at least want to hold on to them for a short period of time. But no one should be in custody.
I'm listening to this guy.
No one should be in custody because they can't afford $100 bail. And I currently have a few clients who are in custody because they can't afford $1,000. They don't have a friend, they don't have a bank account to get that access to $1,000, and they've been sitting in jail for months.
Thank you, Joe. We do have to move along a little bit too, I guess.
I'll give shorter answers. I'm sorry, Diane.
No, I'm just seeing I'm seeing more and more hands raised, and I'm starting to get nervous. So Bill Newell, then Gail, and then Kalima.
Hi, Joe. First of all, I just real quickly want to thank you for all your public service that you've done. I'm not personally all that familiar with you, but it sounds like you've done a lot of great things in the community, and I just want to personally thank you for your service.
Thank you, Bill.
The comments you made tonight certainly are questions I think many of us have thought long and hard about and have struggled with. Particularly, appreciate your question about Black Lives Matter. What does that truly mean? And I've really kind of evolved with that question myself, and learned a lot more about it, especially over this last summer with a lot of the recent demonstrations that I participated in with a variety of ethnic people. Also, your question about what does it mean to defund the police, that's also been a real politically charged question that has gone right up to Obama and how he's interpreted it, and how people maybe have misinterpreted what he interpreted to be. But in particular, what I want to with those two questions, I think you also left me with another question that really resonated a lot, and I think it resonates with some other people here tonight as well. And that's your question about what kind of a DA do we want to have for our county? What kind of a sheriff do we want to have for our county? Therefore, what kind of a criminal justice system do we want to have for our county? And I think I know for myself and for a number of other folks, we've worked a lot on the grassroots level in San Mateo County, particularly around electoral politics, but also trying to work with our existing elected officials. And without getting too deep into it or getting personal in terms of, I'm not going to throw any names out, but I know a number of us are kind of at a point where we're stymied and frustrated with some of our elected officials, particularly around criminal justice issues. And we're trying to figure out where to go from there, because we really know at this point it's going to be electoral politics that's going to really make a change for us in terms of how we go about electing people. Because frankly, right now, I feel a lot of times when I've gone to the ballot box, especially locally, I don't feel like there's a choice there that really represents the kind of system that you described I might want to have. So that's a long-winded question, if it can be a question. But any sort of perspective, I want to honor and respect your experiences as both an elected official and somebody who's also tried to work with those people, in terms of how you feel we as citizens could be more effective in that regard.
So let me try to answer this in a couple of different ways. Number one, before this year, I'm not even sure anybody in San Mateo was paying attention. There have been a few incidents that came up that got some attention for a short period of time, but I think this year really there was a focus on justice issues, racial justice when it comes to the criminal justice system, especially here in San Mateo, but everywhere. I think people need to understand. I think a lot of people think the criminal justice system is the same everywhere, and that voting for a DA is just sort of a pro forma exercise, and it's not. You really have to pay attention to who you're electing, what the policies are going to be. Accountability for police officers, having a transparent process. That's another issue that's going to have to be solved in part by the legislature and in part by the district attorneys. One of the ideas that I like a lot was proposed in Los Angeles by their new district attorney, which was to have a committee that includes defense attorneys and civil rights advocates who are looking at these incidents and who make a recommendation about whether to file charges when a police officer uses excess force or when someone dies in custody. If you go back to the Chinadu Kobe case, or if you go back to a more recent case in the city of San Mateo, my city, there's this two-step process by the local district attorney who, number one, says, do I think that something wrong was done here? And number two, do I think that a local jury would convict the officer for this conduct? I think that very often district attorneys sell the community short. I think that I could pick a jury, and I would pick a jury that would hold police officers accountable. And so that part of the process, I think, needs to change. I don't want to see district attorneys in San Mateo or anywhere not file charges in a righteous case because they sell a jury short that this jury won't convict that officer for wrong conduct, for excessive force. And so that's part of what I would like to see change. I think having an independent committee of those civil rights leaders and defense attorneys would be part of that kind of process that could help. But you got to pay attention to who you elect. You got to make this an issue that people are deciding on their ballot. And
okay, so just to clarify, because
actually, Bill.
Never mind. Go ahead.
Bill, we can take this offline. Call me tomorrow.
Go ahead.
So sorry about this.
Move on.
I wanted to give everyone who wanted to ask a question the opportunity to do it. And also, please keep your questions direct and short so that we can get everyone in. And here's my complete list. Gail is next, and then Kalima, Paul, and then Elsa. Marshall, your hand is no longer up, but I did have you on my list. David Usher, Nancy, and Sarah Fields. So that's my complete list. Gail.
Okay, well, I have so many questions that I hope maybe you will be a guest at the Social Justice Task Force sometime so we can cover it all. I hope you might say a few words about the so-called war on drugs and what you mentioned that briefly, maybe elaborate a bit. And also, no one else seems to mention it much, but criminal justice fees are very often very weighty burden on people who have been incarcerated, including the cost of wearing a monitor. And you might say something about, monitored release as an alternative to incarceration, so that people have a chance to get back to their family and get back to their work. So I'll stop there.
Great questions. So the war on drugs was really the ratcheting up of the enhancements and penalties, whether it was marijuana, cocaine, crack cocaine, different penalties for crack cocaine versus cocaine, all those kinds of things. Many, many people went to prison for that. We were not treating the addiction. It was an escalation of violence in our communities. It's not how we're handling the opioid addiction, and I think the way that we're handling opioids is better, but we can't go back. The other part of the question, fees. Fees is great. So right here in San Mateo County, I know that we have people who owe thousands of dollars just for getting cited for not having a driver's license. Some of them can't get a driver's license. Some of them have tried to get a driver's license. Some of them have an expired driver's license. But even a low-level offense, an infraction, can have thousands of dollars in penalties. And of course, anybody else who spends any time in jail could lose their job. It is a very serious question. And when we take their money in fees, it means that they don't have money to pay for food for their families. It means they don't have money to pay restitution for the victims. So it's a very serious issue that I don't think that that's being addressed right now either. Thank you very much for the question, Gail.
Yeah, actually, when we tried to find out what the fees were in our county, we got a funny response.
Okay. Kalima, and then Paul, and then Elsa.
So there was a lot of talk about laws, but I do want to say that we have to live long enough to be prosecuted and to get back to like policing and especially in our local communities. I didn't appreciate the picture at the end because I feel like a lot of white legislators self-centered themselves in kneeling with the police. Of course you feel okay kneeling with the police. They're not harassing you. But for those that live in fear of interaction with anyone in a uniform is completely different. And so one of the things that I like to have is data, and getting concrete data out of any of our police departments is really hard. And so I'm wondering, what can we do to get better data so that there can be accountability and we can follow progress? Because there was the really popular reforms, and if you just pass these reforms and police stations and police departments were saying, well, we are doing those things. It was really hard to track, like, are they really following the forms or are they just checking these boxes? How do we get real transparency and data and real accountability and follow through when they are out of bounds of clear data points? What would happen? Is there something that the DA could do or citizens can do to hold those folks in check?
Thank you very much for the question. I want to address just the question about data, and it needs to happen, and it is happening at the state legislature. They're requiring certain things get reported. You can file a Public Records Act request. I've filed Public Records Act requests in order to get use of force by police officers, and they have to report to me the ethnicity of the person who they contacted, the injuries that occurred to that person, what they were being contacted for. The state has just begun to start to require that data be collected. It gets reported on an annual basis to the Department of Justice for the state of California, but that's not a report that I get sent in the mail. So I have filed for all the local counties for that data for each police department. I think it's important that we know how many people have been injured by that police department. Why were they being contacted? So we're just at the very beginning. I mean, this is really in the first couple of years of that kind of stuff being required. And I think there's a lot more room to require more data. And the way to do it is for the state legislature who wants to do this. So we just have to come up with good ideas, and the state legislature will pass it, and we'll require police officers to do it. One of the things that hasn't come up yet is police officers who get fired by their previous agency. we have to have transparency laws that make sure that those officers don't get picked up by another department and hurt somebody else. Thank you, Kalima, very much for the question. There was a lot more to what you were talking about, and I'd love to talk more about that particular day and kneeling with those particular officers, but you need to give those officers credit, because those 3 officers knelt on a day when there were 50 officers around them who were not kneeling, who didn't want to kneel. And I give those officers credit for kneeling next to me, and I appreciated it very much on that day. It was not easy to be them, and their courage and their real passion to do that. So I thank you.
Thank you for that, Paul. And then Elsa.
Hi, Paul.
Well, hey, hello, Joe. There's so many things that I'd like to talk about here that I have personal experience with. Some of these reforms, realignment, are scary. There was no true lived experience when we were making these reforms, first and foremost. The only thing we are realigning with that, sir, is we are now bringing prisons straight downtown right here where I live in Redwood City. That's what's happening. We are going to see an expansion of recruiting like you've never seen here before. And unfortunately, many people are not aware of these realignment, how they're going to affect us directly. So I have personal experience on how we operated, how we recruited from a jail cell. In fact, from Pelican Bay in isolation, I was still recruiting in Santa Clara County. And what is happening today is scary. And unfortunately, there has been no effort, even today, to truly realign and keep these at-risk youth away from these more sophisticated criminals when we try them as adults and we put them with these sophisticated criminals so they can continue to wreak havoc and a cancer in our communities. And furthermore, when we try these kids as adults at 18 years old and put them with parolees that we're bringing back from prison for Franklin hearings, for instance, right, that have been there 20 years, they bring in an ideology with them here, and there has been no effort. In fact, the lack of represents the current culture in these current administrations that say, no, it's okay, because those are colored people, and we have policies and sentencing schemes that are going to keep them locked away. Unfortunately, we're going to be keeping them locked right here down the street where I live. And it's scary that CDCR is now trying to deflate what they created through the 80s and 90s, and now they're dumping it on the counties. Shame on them. Shame on them. So the other thing for Mr. Camacho's response.
Okay, excuse me, Paul, do you have a question? You need to ask Joe a question.
So, yes. So I live in San Mateo County. I live in Redwood City. Very small population of minorities here, encapsulated in certain areas. However, the largest incarcerated population in our county. How can we tip that scale to make it fair?
So a couple of things about that. I want to validate what you said about realignment, that there was a concern that it would mean more sophisticated criminals in our jails. And I think we saw a little bit of that. So you're right. I also want to say we need alternatives to jail. We see way too many people. I said half the jail is people with mental health issues and half the jail people with addiction. We need to get them out of the jails, give them treatment. That's what's really needed. But you're bringing up another issue of the diversity of our county, diversity of our jail, diversity of the people who get contacted by the police. If you look at the diversity of San Mateo County in the 70s, when we started ratcheting up the sentences and sending way more people to prison, San Mateo was a much more diverse county. One of the side effects, one of the consequences, unintended or not, is that San Mateo has become far less diverse since we started sending more and more people to prison. We went from 10% African American in the county to 1%. This is looked at as a county that's not friendly to outsiders, and many of the people who are in our jails are people who are not residents of San Mateo County. It's something that that should be looked at. I think that when we look at our data for the ethnicity and the profile of the people who are being contacted by police officers, it's important to look at not just the ethnic profile, but also the residency of those individuals, so that we can drill down more on that information. I think that's not a question that the data, I don't think I've seen any data that answers your question. Thank you, Paul.
Question. And then Elsa, and then Marshall, and we're really running over time, and this is such rich conversation. I don't want to, I want everyone to have an opportunity to ask their questions. So please do make your questions short. Elsa, and then Marshall.
Thanks, Diana. I just have to say thank you so much for bringing Joe to us, and particularly in this first meeting where I think, Joe, you are giving us one of the most inspiring, action-oriented first meetings that we could possibly ask for. And thank you, thank you. I think you'll see it have effect across all the task forces that we set up. Joe, the question I've got is, I once heard from my town mayor, who then moved on to the city council, to the county council as well, that when a prior sheriff or candidate tried to run in opposition to the current then incumbent sheriff, that we were crazy, and that the current sheriff was respected by his people and would be able to better manage them than would anybody else coming in, and that we didn't get that, despite the fact that they all lived 2 to 2.5 hours later, that their politics were extremely conservative is one word. There are a lot of other words that could go into that, and that we who live in quote unquote our bubble just don't get it. And I was just so shocked to hear that. And I'd love to know your advice for how we attract different candidates for DA, for sheriff, so that we have choices we can believe in and really get behind. And I'd just like to say that this is one of the most effective activist groups I've ever known in my life. And when we put our minds to something, we can really help make it happen. We would love your advice on how to get better candidates in those roles.
Well, that's a very difficult and rich question. I think that, let me try to answer it in a couple different ways. So one, it's an extremely difficult time for anybody who wants to go into public service. I spent last year as the mayor, and I was talking to mayors across the country who are just traumatized. They're suffering from PTSD from their service to their communities. It is a very difficult task. So you have to find somebody willing to make such a huge personal sacrifice. But you also have to get voters to pay attention. And I think that that's maybe the harder piece. I've said it before, and I'll say it again, that we have different criminal justice systems based on from county to county, and there are policies that you can adopt that have real consequences on the ground for individuals. It determines how full your jail is going to be. I have 4 or 5 clients who literally were committing shoplifting. I've got a client who walked in and tried to pay for a phone with a credit card, tried to pay for it a second time. The credit card didn't go through. He picked it up and he walked out of the Walgreens, and he was charged with robbery. And I think that's absurd. I think to send this individual who happens to be African American to prison for 5 years for shoplifting, an offense that should maybe come with 5 days, is absurd. And those decisions get made by the elected official. Those are policies that can change on day one if you choose to. So you have to get voters to pay attention. You have to find the right people. You have to figure out what are the issues that you care about that you want to see changed. Because all of those reforms that I mentioned back in realignment in 2011, Prop 47 in 2012, Prop 57, and all the other propositions, Our district attorney and the district attorneys across the state opposed those and said that the sky would fall and we would see rampant crime and violent crime would dramatically increase if we passed those things. We passed them. And I'm proud to say that our prison population went from over 180,000 to our current prison population that is 95,000. We have cut the prison population almost in half. That's a good thing. I recognize that police departments would be quick to point out that we're seeing a rise in property crime. Cars get broken into, and even I had a bicycle stolen the other day. We are seeing a rise in that, and we need to crack down on some of the property crimes, but not crack down by sending them to prison for 5 years. Crack down in giving police officers the resources to make sure that we're enforcing the laws. That's all, and appropriately sentenced, and electing people who are going to support the next round of reforms.
Thank you.
So
Thank you for that. So the remainder of the list, no more follow-up questions. David, Nancy, and then Sarah, and that's it. That's the final list. Make your questions short, please.
We only have 2 more hours. We only have 2
Yeah, I know.
more hours, and that's it. That's it. No more after that.
Man after our own hearts.
I'll start with my question and then the reason I'm asking it. You, as a formerly elected official in the city of San Mateo, what public opinion did you listen to? How was public opinion expressed to you in a way that you would hear and be motivated to act on? The reason I ask is that last autumn, I participated in something that was required by the state law for the county sheriff to answer the public why he voluntarily hands people over to ICE when they have served their sentences. More than 70 people spoke at that meeting, that Zoom meeting, some with heartbreaking personal testimony. It became obvious that they were allowing us to speak and nobody was listening, because at the end of it, thank you very much, we can now tick a box, we've done what the state law requires, nothing changed. And this was my first time on such a meeting, but they've happened, I learned, on previous years. How does the public make elected public officials hear what they are saying? What do you respond to?
Well, if I could be direct, I respond to how many people voted for me, and if that enough people voted for me, then I'm going to be in the role, and if they didn't, then I'm not there. I think many elected officials aren't going to change their stripes once they get into office. It's hard to expect them to change their stripes, so you've got to elect the people who agree with you before they take the office, which means you have to get people to pay attention to what these offices do. We had a president for the last 4 years who was in charge of ICE, and he wanted to deport anybody and everybody for any reason. He didn't mind separating families. He didn't mind gathering up people who had not committed any crime whatsoever. Elections have consequences. And that was the consequence of the 2016 election, which is at the head of our immigration department, was separating families and sending people to countries that they don't even know. They haven't spent any time there. So I'm glad that we have elected a different president. I'm glad that we will see different policies out of the next Immigration and Customs Enforcement Department, and I would expect a district attorney and the sheriff to follow suit. I don't know that you could have advocated in a different way other than to work for someone else to hold the office. I'm going to say one thing about Sheriff Bolanos. There are some extremely violent criminals who I don't mind seeing get deported. So there is that. And I don't think that we've seen the current administration hand over everybody that they could to ICE. It's only the people who they felt were necessary, but I understand your question. Thank you very much for that, David.
And the next is Nancy and then Sarah, and that's the end of our list.
Nancy Rabe, because I didn't raise my hand.
Okay, well, actually, so my question was actually kind of partially answered, but I also was curious about how to better gauge as a community advocate group with around transparency and accountability in policing. But I don't want to take any more time. Is it okay to maybe correspond by email?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Send me an email.
Yeah.
No problem. Thank you, Nancy.
Maybe later you could put your email in chat.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm going to ask my question.
Okay.
Hi, Joe.
Hi.
So you've worked in 2 different DA offices here in Alameda County, and I'm wondering if you can speak to practices around the death penalty, which has sort of lost public support over the years, and I think my guess is that it's significantly less popular in California than it used to be. But we've seen use of the death penalty in federal cases. And so I'm curious if you can just talk about if you've ever tried a death penalty case, if they're common locally, has the current DA speak to that issue, because I'll say personally, I think it's abhorrent that we would ever kill someone as like a part of our justice system. And we know from programs like the Innocence Project that we've gotten it wrong. Frankly, I think once we found out we've gotten it wrong once, we should have stopped, but we've gotten it wrong many times. And we know that there are significant factors around race and other identities that play into conviction in a death penalty case. It's also incredibly expensive. It's really unethical. Anyway, speak to the death penalty locally in the Bay Area.
So in Alameda County, it was used very sparingly. There were only a couple of times, and I had nothing to do with those cases in Alameda County. In San Mateo County, there's only been one case, and recently the decision on that was changed. So the current district attorney for San Mateo, Steve Wagstaff, supports the death penalty, supported the Proposition 66 to streamline the death penalty, and really headed the statewide campaign on that. I've had mixed feelings on it over the years. Here's my mixed feelings. The kinds of cases that we're talking about are the worst of the worst. They're cases that any one of us would anguish over. We would just, our stomachs would turn if you listen to the facts of that case. So you really have to ask yourself, am I for the death penalty in the abstract or not? Is it okay to kill people or not? Do we want to be among the countries, which is not a good list of countries to be on, that kills people or not? And I don't think we want to be on that list. I think that it's morally wrong to kill people. It's not legally justified. It is sanctioned murder. And when you look at the history of how it has been implemented, it's been implemented in a racially biased way. And to your point, we have exonerated people on death row. And if you think you got it wrong once, you should never do it again. But all you need is it's wrong. That's all you need. Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you very much to the whole group. Diana, thanks for inviting me. Good conversation. I love seeing a room full of people who want to make change. This is an incredibly difficult time to try to make change. It requires huge personal sacrifices from the people who step up. I will reiterate to everyone that today is a day that we will all remember. We will not soon forget. And one of my takeaways from today is, it is as apparent as ever that there are two Americas, and all of us should be striving to make this a more just world. And that's why I think we all showed up tonight. So I appreciate being here with all of you.
Thank you so much, Joe. It was really, we officially went over like 30 minutes. And as I said, it was such a rich conversation. I didn't want to cut anyone off. And I'm so happy that those who were able to join us tonight did, because it was